joining us. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cindy Kunis, and I'm with the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. The DRGP works to promote, protect, and preserve our most beloved Delaware River. I would like to introduce Elizabeth Brown, who will be presenting Our Shared Waters, a history of improving water quality through partnership. Little backstory. Pollution in Delaware River was recognized as a problem as early as the 1700s. Today, we know the Delaware River is cleaner than ever. In fact, its cleanup is hailed as one of the world's top water quality success stories and was named River of the Year in 2020. Elizabeth Brown is Director of External Affairs and Communications for the Delaware River Basin Commission. She brings over 15 years of experience and a deep knowledge of the basin and the environmental field. Most recently, Beth led the National Audubon Society's Delaware River Watershed Program. She holds a BS in biology from Muhlenberg College and a JD from George Washington University Law School. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away, Beth.
Thank you. Hi, and thanks Cindy and Mark and everyone at the Greenway Partnership for hosting me this evening. And thanks to everybody in the audience, to you for your interest and participation tonight. As Cindy said, my name is Beth Elizabeth Brown. I'm the Director of External Affairs and Communications at the Delaware River Basin Commission. My great honor tonight is to talk about some of the backstory of how the Delaware River got to be polluted, what's been going on since pollution was recognized as an issue, how the DRBC began, and why partnership is so key to our success. Before we begin, I want to start with an Indigenous lands acknowledgement. As I'm sure you know, we are on Native lands, and we recognize and appreciate that we are here. And I also want to start with a quick just terminology overview. You may have heard the term basin, you may have heard the term watershed. Basin is just a large watershed. It can be made up of smaller subwatersheds, and a watershed is just the area of land that drains to a particular river or stream. And so all the watersheds that eventually drain to the Delaware River make up the Delaware River Basin. And we are the Delaware River Basin Commission, but what is our Delaware River Basin? We serve over 13 million people in over 13,500 square miles, 2,000 plus tributaries, 868 municipalities, 330 miles of the main stem Delaware River from its confluence at Hancock, New York to the ocean in Lewis, Delaware and Cape May, 42 counties, 4 states, and that all comes together to form one basin. And the water and the related resources of the Delaware River Basin are regional assets, and they've really been recognized as having local, state, and national interests across these different geographic boundaries, different political boundaries. And so tonight, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what was the need for and what problems were solved by the creation of a Delaware River Basin. We're really going into the backstory a little bit on water supply shortages and disputes, pollution, floods and droughts, disjointed planning and management, and recognition of the joint responsibility for this national treasure. On the left is an editorial cartoon from the Philadelphia Record. I believe this was in 1937, and it's entitled "Water, Water Everywhere, but Not a Drop Fit to Drink." And so that truly is in the heart of our basin in the Philadelphia region, surrounded on 2 sides by the Schuylkill River and the Delaware River. You know, in this period in particular, there was a growing awareness of the issue of water pollution. And there were many discussions and deliberations and disputes about how to best approach water quality, especially when it was coming across state borders. And so one of the main issues that predated the Delaware River Basin Commission was who had the right to use water from the basin and how much. And as you can see here, there were two cases that went to the Supreme Court where New Jersey and New York were fighting over the amount of water. In 1931, New Jersey sued New York and New York City. There had been plans to divert up to 600 million gallons per day to supplement water supply to New York City in the Catskill Mountains, which of course is in the headwaters of our Delaware River Basin. There were unsuccessful efforts to reach an agreement, and so it resulted in litigation between the two states and the city. Pennsylvania intervened in that case and proposed a flexible approach. And so ultimately in that first Supreme Court litigation, the court ruled that the doctrine of riparian rights didn't govern interstate water disputes in this case. And the lesson learned was that state sovereignty was not the acceptable mechanism for allocating water between states, that there had to be something else more to the story. And in this case, the Supreme Court justice that was key here was Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he wrote famously that a river is more than an amenity, it is a treasure. And he went on to talk about that New York had the physical power to cut off water in its jurisdiction as an upstream user, but that, and I'm quoting here, clearly the exercise of such a power to the destruction of the interest of lower states could not be tolerated. And on the other hand, equally little could New Jersey be permitted to require New York to give up its power altogether. And so in this case, it was recognized that the states all had real and substantial interests in the river that had to be reconciled as best they may. And he also said that different traditions and practices in different parts of the country may lead to varying results, but the effort always is to secure an equitable apportionment without quibbling over formulas. And that idea of equitable apportionment has been sort of the driving factor in this area ever since. And so in the second case in 1954, the resolution is what we call a decree, the 1954 Supreme Court decree. And it essentially resulted in how to apportion or share water among the states. And so the New York City reservoirs were constructed, and right now there are 3 reservoirs within the Delaware River Basin that serve New York City. Cannonsville, Capacton, and Neversink are all part of a larger Delaware system. There's a second system, and collectively that series of reservoirs collects water and diverts it through a series of tunnels, aqueducts to New York City. However, those 3 that I mentioned are the 3 within our basin, our watershed. And they're owned and operated by the city of New York, but so they have a major impact at the headwaters on the rest of the system. And one of the outcomes of the Supreme Court litigation and the resolution of these disputes was the Delaware River Master, which is a position through the USGS, that there's a flow target that has to be met. So there has to be a certain amount of water that continues to flow down the river in spite of and in consideration of the operation of these reservoirs for water supply to New York City. So that was a huge sort of preceding event before the DRBC was formed. And we still live with the outcome, especially the 1954 case. It creates structures, roles, and responsibilities among the 4 basin states, but also among with the city of New York. And those are sometimes referred to as the decree parties. The decree parties are separate from the members of the Delaware River Basin Commission, but they play an important role. And there's an important interplay between the DRBC and the decree parties. One of the other major controversies that began before DRBC and in some ways led to its creation, but ultimately was resolved after the DRBC was formed, was the Tox Island dam proposal. This was first proposed in response to major flooding from hurricanes in 1955. And the Army Corps proposed it for flood control, and ultimately the land was acquired in the upper Delaware for the purpose of creating this dam and major reservoir that would have been about 70,000 acres. And ultimately the project never was seen to its finish. But the land was already acquired by the federal government in many cases. And that's what has become now the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. And so it's now a 70,000 acre park. But ultimately it was deemed too costly. Over the period of time that it was hotly debated, the New York Times said that Tox has become a household name, right? It's a name that people know throughout the country, even outside of this area. But ultimately, the DRBC, after it was created in 1975, voted not to pursue the project. But it has left a mark and a legacy on the upper basin in terms of the creation of a park and a recreation area, but also in shaping, the environmental movement and shaping conservation values and feelings and thoughts about, the role of government, both positive and negative. So it's certainly a big part of the backstory and sort of the history of the DRBC. The other major area, as I mentioned, before DRBC's creation was in water quality. And before the water quality, before the DRBC was formed, the early colonialization and early settlement by Europeans was really the beginning of the water quality issues in the region. Henry Hudson first came to this region in 1609. So we do have a long history of European settlement in the region. As I mentioned, Native Americans have long been resident in the area before European settlement. But the river was part of the American Revolution. Everybody knows the story of the Washington's crossing of the Delaware. And then in the Industrial Revolution, and with rapid population growth in our cities and towns and increased industrial activity, at that time there was limited treatment of waste from both human waste and industrial processes. And that led to pollution in the Delaware River, especially in the tidal reaches. So south of Trenton, primarily Philadelphia, Camden, and Wilmington. And it led to waterborne illness, typhoid and other issues, as well as sharp declines in migratory fish, such as the American shad, which had been known as the founding fish. It was a key part of the economy, the culture, the heritage of the region. And because of low oxygen levels, created by the take-up of oxygen through human and other wastes in the river, fish were no longer able to migrate through and traverse large sections of the Delaware River. This was known as anoxia or hypoxia, where there was either no or low dissolved oxygen. And by the height of the World War II era, this was really the low point of water quality in the river. It was rampant. the river was, described as being so foul that it would change the color of ship hulls coming through, and people really were put off by the smell, the sight. It was evident that all was not right in the river. And so, as I mentioned, American shad are a type of fish that as part of their life cycle swim upstream, and spend part of their life cycle in the ocean and part in freshwater tributaries. And so to complete that life cycle in low and no oxygen conditions was ultimately fatal and led to a severe decline in shad as well as other populations of fish. And so by the mid 1900s, there was essentially no dissolved oxygen in the Delaware River on a typical day, especially in summer, when temperatures tend to be higher and the water can hold less oxygen. On the left, there's a discharge shown from I believe this is from a slaughterhouse in Philadelphia. And on the right side of your screen, it just depicts a, unfortunately, fairly typical fish kill event in the basin in the early part of the last century. And so in 1961, years before the Environmental Protection Agency or the existence of the Federal Clean Water Act, or even really the existence of the environmental movement as we know it today, the Delaware River Basin Commission was formed. We really worked and formed to create a solution to one of the nation's most polluted rivers. And so we got our start in 1961, and the Delaware River Basin Compact is the structure that brought our agency to light. It was signed by President Kennedy and governors of the 4 basin states. And these 4 came together, plus the federal government, as 5 equal members, with a mission to manage, protect, and improve the basin's water resources. Today, the federal government is represented by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers leadership, and the commissioners meet quarterly to both review progress on the commission's comprehensive plan, as well as vote on projects that will have a significant impact on the water resources of the basin. This can take the form of both a regulated discharge or water withdrawal. Those are typically handled in a permit-like fashion that we call dockets. Or the commissioners can take action through resolutions on specific issues or areas of concern. And so the commission's formation really changed the Delaware River Basin from an arena of conflict to a model of federal and state cooperation. Unlike other parts of the country where cross-border water disputes have continued to show up in court and run up litigation costs, we've really modeled alternative dispute resolution on an ongoing basis in a way that is cost effective, that is predictable, and provides clarity and cooperation and partnership, of course, so that there is an adequate, sustainable, and resilient flow of water, and that water is clean and healthy. And of course, those two things are interconnected, but those tend to be the two sort of areas in which we divide our work. And the main sort of feeling of, or the thrust of the Delaware River Basin Commission is that through partnership those 4 states and the federal government achieve for the basin and for our interstate, our shared waters, what individual members could not accomplish alone. And speaking of our mission, today we consider our mission in sort of 4 main areas: water quality, availability, equity, and resiliency. And over time, our appreciation and understanding of the ways in which these issues are interconnected has evolved and has become more sophisticated. And we continue to learn and grow. Certainly an issue like environmental justice was not on the radar in 1961. And so, we're an agency that has the flexibility and the adaptability within our governing compact to look at issues in that way as the times, change and our awareness of issues and understanding of them changes as well. And so in this area, it's important to note, we're not just a planning agency, we're not just a cooperative agency between states, but we have and we do exercise regulatory authority. And that has been key to our success as well, especially in the water quality arena, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. Our staff is mainly in these 4 areas, including, as I mentioned, water quality through a robust standard setting, as well as management and monitoring program. Planning, looking at water availability. Just recently, we published an assessment of how much groundwater is available today and into the future, so that we can understand and make decisions around that particular type of resource being available. Our operations group looks at reservoir levels and how they impact flow in the river, how flow impacts things like salinity and the ability of saltwater to intrude up into freshwater spaces. And our project review team looks at proposed water withdrawals, proposed discharges to interstate waters, and advises the commission on recommended action on our permit program. So what have we done to improve water quality since we began in 1961? What brought it back? We know that the Delaware River, as Cindy said at the outset, is hailed as one of the success stories, right, in clean water. And it has come such a long way from its polluted past in the late 1800s and mid 1900s. Today it supports hundreds of species of wildlife, and people are coming back to the river to play, to live, to work. River trails, riverfront amenities are more desirable than ever because the river itself is more desirable than ever, right? The very qualitative factors that we can appreciate even without, training and understanding, like smell and color and things like that, make it a treasured resource. And going below the surface, the water quality has indeed improved. And so the biggest step forward came in 1967, where the DRBC for the first time adopted the most comprehensive water quality standards of any interstate river basin in the nation. And this is one of the things that really does set the DRBC apart, is that we set water quality standards for the interstate river, and then the states in our basin tend to adopt those and defer or refer to them. And so it is a really unique structure that allows this consistency across state lines, because as you may know, the Delaware River is actually the border between states for almost all of its flow, from New York, Pennsylvania, to New Jersey, Pennsylvania, to Delaware, New Jersey. It really is a unique management challenge in that sense. So these 1967 standards focused on dissolved oxygen, and they were tied to waste load allocation. At that time, a really innovative approach that factored in the capacity of the tidal river in locations where discharges were happening, of the river to assimilate or to sort of take up and sort of deal with the discharges that were happening. And at the time, the Interior Secretary, who was the federal representative at the time, said that only the Delaware, among the nation's river basins, is moving into high gear in its program to combat water pollution. So we really got out ahead, as I mentioned before, ahead of even the formation and the start of the federal EPA. The next year, DRBC also adopted regulations for implementing and enforcing those standards. And so that was really the kickstart to improving water quality. And in the years since, DRBC has added additional regulations to its overall approach to managing water quality. And one of the key areas it has worked in is in toxics. So the toxic standards were established in a similar concept to those 1960s dissolved oxygen standards, serving as a common border and thinking about it from an interstate perspective. Initially in the case of toxics, the states had independently developed water quality criteria, but it was a splintered approach. And so the states turned to the commission for assistance. And so DRBC, in response to that, formed a toxics management program that addressed the collective needs and goals of those 4 states plus the federal government. And so that's really been hailed as a success. We've been celebrated for the work on toxics and PCBs in particular, from both the regulated community as well as the conservation community. And that's a huge thing to happen in government, and in no small way should be minimized. So those are 2 of the sort of taking degraded waters and bringing them back, 2 highlights there. And the third area I really would like to focus on is what DRBC has done to recognize the value in keeping clean water clean and preventing it from degrading. So the Commission's Special Protection Waters Program, this was initially adopted by the DRBC in 1992. It then was expanded in 1994 and again in 2008. And it's really meant to, as the slides say, keep clean water clean, right? So if existing water quality is better than the established standard, then any discharge has to establish that there will be no measurable change before it will be approved. It also defines existing water quality at various control points along the river in this area, and where major tributaries come into the main stem Delaware River. It also sort of lowers the threshold for certain criteria where a permit or where a permission may be needed from DRBC, and really just takes a watershed and basin approach to managing these designated waters, as well as their drainage area. It regulates both point and non-point discharges, which is key. So how do we do it? We do it through partnership. From the beginning, it's the 4 states and the federal government coming together as equal partners. But to do the work day to day, we rely on partners of all types. The fact that those 5 different governments with their own sovereign powers can successfully work together on equal footing has caught the eye of river managers in the United States and internationally. But it places great emphasis on outreach, public engagement, and public involvement. DRBC really relies on advisory committees to provide input, help shape policy, and craft new regulations. Our committees are populated by experts in a number of different fields in which we have mission areas, from the regulated community to nonprofits to academia and other government agencies. And that's a really great opportunity if you're a professional in the field in any way, shape, or form. There's probably an advisory committee that could use your expertise. So I invite you to take a look at our website and see the various areas in which we have committees and frequently have openings. Everything from climate change to monitoring and management, to flow management and more. But it's not just advisory committees. We listen, right? And earlier in the slides, I showed that the commission meets in quarterly business meetings. At each of those quarterly business meetings, there's an hour of open public comment where the public is invited to address the commissioners on an issue related to water management of their choice. And that's something that not many, I know it happens in some other agencies, but not many other agencies offer. And so, that ability to speak to the commissioners directly and raise issues is really a special thing. And then before we issue permits, dockets, as I mentioned, we call them, and other major steps like rule making, we go through a public notice and comment period. We have hearings on each of our dockets, and we hold hearings on rules before they are adopted. And so some of the other key areas are our State of the Basin report. Every 5 years, the Commission is supported by numerous stakeholders and partners to develop a report that analyzes the state of the basin. And we do that by looking at the health of the Delaware River through key indicator species, looking at water availability, quality, climate change, land cover, whether populations of species, everything from osprey to shad, as I mentioned, as a key species earlier, eels and beyond. Are the populations growing? Are they stable? Are macroinvertebrates plentiful in the streams and riffles of the main stem, or are they showing decline? So the Delaware River, as I said, is much cleaner than it's been, but we really need those facts and those data to show us and to help us see where there's continued room for improvement. And we do that by relying on species experts and land cover specialists and land preservation organizations and efforts by other partners where DRBC doesn't have the mission are critical to make up that full picture of what's needed, but then also to take action. So all of the partnerships that we have where other organizations can do what we can't, where they're conserving land or engaging in restoration projects. Those are all ensuring that the health of our basin continues to improve. And some of the other key partnerships that we're involved in from a very, sort of organizational perspective are listed here. We're a key member of the Delaware Estuary Programs Steering Committee. Obviously, our host tonight, the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. We have a role in planning the annual Delaware Sojourn, which is a great event that Mark can speak to. We're a non-voting member of the Upper Delaware Council, which implements the management plan for the Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River. The Delaware River Basin Conservation Collaborative, which is implementing a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant program, and many more. Everything from, very specific, smaller watershed management plans to source water protection programs. We engage in great relationships with many of our regulated entities and docket holders, and have a robust partnership program through the Our Shared Waters program as well. And that really is the power of partnership. We are raising awareness of our work through communications and events. Our policymakers are key partners as well to understand what's happening in their districts. In some cases, constituents raise issues to them and they look to us for expertise and understanding. And in some cases, we are highlighting issues for them in briefings and educational opportunities as well. We're educating the public on our latest scientific research and findings, and we're engaging in dialogue in communities throughout our basin, including communities that have historically been excluded from water management decisions or from recreation and other opportunities to engage in our basin's amenities and treasures. And as we said, the Delaware River is not just a river, it is a treasure. So with that, I will wrap up my prepared remarks, and I really look forward to your questions, but I'll just put in a plug very quickly to stay in touch. We have a form where you can sign up for our various listservs. The Our Shared Waters program I mentioned has a Facebook page that you can see not just events that DRBC is hosting or engaged in, but all of our partners are putting on. And so if it's a local watershed organization that's a partner, or another organization that's working in a different area, you can see everything that's happening in the basin and get an appreciation for how robust it is. And if you have any questions for me directly, my email is there, and feel free to reach out. So I'll go with the Q&A, I guess, first. When we have high water, flooding, or damages, does the commission become involved? Yeah, that's a great question. So tonight, I really didn't have the chance to touch on a lot of our work on water flow and management and climate change, right? But that is certainly a key part of the work that we're engaged in. The Delaware River Basin Commission does not take direct action in flooding. However, we do have a number of programs that touch on flooding awareness, mitigation, and capacity building in communities. One that I'd really love to highlight is this past year we actually partnered with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency on a program. It was focused in the upper basin, so in Pike, Wayne, and Monroe counties, to work with communities that had had repetitive loss from flooding, to really help expand the understanding of federal and state resources available through programs like BRIC and other FEMA funded grants, and really help shape and kind of workshop some areas that could get ready for grant applications so that those communities could really stop that flood, loss, rinse, repeat cycle. And so we're excited to be able to continue that work. We're sort of slowly working our way south. And the next grant cycle will be partnering with FEMA in sort of the upper north of the Lehigh Valley, so Carbon, Lehigh, and Berks County, I believe. So that's just one of the many things we do, but we do a lot of, if there's a major event coming, we do a lot of sort of information sharing and gathering, and sort of work as a clearinghouse among various agencies. And so I do see there's another question here about flooding as well. Yes, so 04, 05, and 06, that was a series of years exactly as this person is indicating. There was significant flooding. Yeah, so the New York City reservoirs, there's a really complicated sort of public perception about the role there, but the reservoirs really don't lead directly to flooding. Reservoir releases do not lead directly to flooding. But there's certainly always a great awareness and interest in when reservoir releases are being proposed to change, or the flow regime is changing. There's certainly a great awareness. I think a lot of what can be done in the flood space is actually unfortunately not at the commission level. It's things like stormwater management at your either local or county level, thinking about whether it's stormwater regulation or best management practices, things like that, and then thinking about climate change, right, in a more global and regional way. That's an area where we're certainly doing a lot more study and thinking to understand, if a flood of 04, 05, 06, were to happen with climate change conditions into the future, like what does that look like, right? So trying to understand what's coming our way and how can communities better prepare. Question about, do we interact with the New Jersey Pinelands Commission? No, so we really don't. Most of our basin is not in the Pinelands. There may be a very small area of overlap. I'm actually not quite sure if there is any, but primarily the Pinelands is out of the basin, or the main sort of thrust of it is further out of the basin. Great. And then I see there's a couple in the chat. Anyone else in the chat? No. Any other questions folks wanna throw my way? Has the DRBC made any major changes as an organization in response to climate change? Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually have about 3 to 4 years ago now, we did pass a resolution on climate change, and the DRBC launched its newest advisory committee is actually on climate change. And a lot of the work that our flow management and operations staff does is really strongly influenced by understanding what future conditions are. And you can't talk about future conditions without talking about climate change. And so there's already sort of a built-in, awareness of, but we've kind of codified it a little bit more explicitly. And great segue. I promise I did not pay this person to ask the question, but one of the key actions of that climate change committee is to hold a forum each year. And so we're coming up to it at the end of January. We'll be holding our climate change forum as part of Partnership for the Delaware Estuary Science and Environmental Summit. It's happening the 29th through February 1st in Atlantic City. It's like a 3-day conference, and day 2 of the conference will be devoted to climate change issues, bringing together both our advisors from the committee who come from, really leading organizations in climate, everything from Rutgers to Cornell, from like academia to advisors in various agencies. And we're going to have a keynote discussion among the New York City, New Jersey, Delaware, and EPA Region 3 heads of the environmental agencies to talk about what their individual agencies are doing, what the latest and greatest is on their climate work, as well as in the DRBC shared space. So yes, thank you so much for that question. That's a whole other talk that I could talk hours about. Great. I see Catherine Evers from PDE is here, and she's just shared a link to the summit. And PDE has been a great partner in helping us put that on, sort of nested within their long-running summit, which is a great place to share scientific research, data, best practices. So that's wonderful.
Thanks so much, Beth. We had an incredible time tonight. Really the past, present, and future of environmental protection nationwide, and your leadership at the Delaware River Basin Commission. Do you see any other questions?
I don't. Oh, I do see one. Sorry. If one observes unusual bubbles of a pollution, i.e. soap in the river, how does one get it tested and investigated? So that's a great question. So if you see something that looks off, most of the state environmental agencies have like a hotline you can call. We don't have one specific to DRBC, but there's typically a number that you can call to report, a spill, report something suspicious activity, that sort of thing that can be investigated. And one more coming in, where can we get water quality reports and water source information? That's a really great question. So that too is unfortunately a lot of different places depending on the need. If you're looking at drinking water, your drinking water supplier is required to publish a drinking water report. I think it's every year. But in a broader sense for the basin, you can look at our last State of the Basin report. That's sort of a roundup. Partnership for the Delaware Estuary also does a tremendous report on the technical report for the estuary and basin, the TREB. That's another great sort of roundup, sort of taking the temperature. But then DRBC also has a lot of data on its website that it posts, depending on what the interest is, what the pollutant or issue is. It sort of depends on what you're looking for.
Thank you very much, Beth.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to, any questions that come out after you leave, send them my way on email. Hope to see you at a future business meeting, future advisory committee meeting. Those, I should also note, are open to the public typically as well. So if you have a particular interest in climate and other areas, you can certainly join.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank you again. I'm Mark from the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. I serve as a trustee on our board of directors. And this is part of our Delaware River Greenway Partnership lecture series. We host speakers like Beth all season long. and stay tuned for our upcoming spring lectures. We'll be focusing on a variety of different environmental and historical topics from across the Delaware River Basin. And I'll put a link to our website in the chat here. If we didn't get to any of your questions, please feel free to follow up either with the email address that you used to log into today's meeting, and we'll get you in touch with Beth, or directly through the Delaware River Basin Commission. And yes, tonight's program was recorded. We post hyperlinks to all of our recorded programs on our website in the chat, DelawareGreenwayPartnership.org. Go to events and past events. It will get you over to our YouTube channel, where you can view tonight's recording once we get it posted tomorrow, and all of our previous programs and lectures. There's quite a bit of good content up there. So stand by, stay in touch. And we couldn't agree more with the Delaware River Basin Commission on the power of partnerships. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Beth, and I hope you have a great evening.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care.